The baby had not made a sound in 4 minutes. That was what finally made her stop walking. Not the cold. It had been cold since Laramie. Cold since before Laramie. Cold since the morning she had stepped off a train platform with nothing but the carpet bag and the child, and the absolute certainty that she could not stay where she was one more day. Not the dark. The moon was up and useful, and she had been navigating worse than this since childhood. It was the silence from the bundle against her chest that made her stop in the middle of the road and press her ear down and hold her own breath to listen. And in the silence she heard what she had needed to hear. The small, wet exhale of a sleeping infant, entirely undisturbed by the fact that his mother had been walking for 2 hours in the wrong boots. She straightened up. The road ahead was dark, and the road behind her was darker, and the wind off the Montana hills smelled like iron and coming snow. She had $7.14, a name no courthouse in the territory would recognize, and a child who had decided, at 4 months old, to trust her entirely. She shifted the bundle higher against her chest and kept walking. If this story has already found you, if you know what it means to carry something precious through the dark and have no one watching for your lamp in the window, please subscribe to this channel right now and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Stay with me, because the road ahead of Grace Hadley leads to a ranch called Copper Falls, and what happens there is going to ask something of a man who has spent 2 years making sure nothing can ask anything of him at all. Her name, what remained of it, was Grace Hadley. She had been Grace Winslow for 23 years, which was the name her father had given her, and she had been 2 hours from becoming Grace Aldridge, which was the name Declan Aldridge had promised her, when Declan Aldridge had not appeared at the front of the First Presbyterian Church of Cheyenne on a Saturday morning in February of 1883. She had stood in the vestibule for 40 minutes in her good dress, with her father's hand on her arm, going gradually rigid, and then the pastor had come to the side door and said the words, and her father had said nothing at all, and that silence had been its own kind of verdict. Declan Aldridge appeared 3 weeks later, not to her, but to her father, to explain that he had reconsidered, that he wished her well, that he hoped she would understand. By then it did not matter what he hoped. By then she already knew about the child. The town had not been unkind, exactly. It had been thorough. The looks had followed her down every street in Cheyenne from February through July, the particular looks of people who believed her situation was a matter of character rather than misfortune. The long, measuring assessment that started at the top and moved downward, and then settled. In the later months, at the middle, where the evidence of her circumstance was written plainly enough for anyone to read. She was not a small woman, and had never been one. She had been broad and solid and certain of her own footing since girlhood, and she had carried that certainty through 8 months of standing very straight in the middle of a town that had decided what she was. She had carried the baby in August, alone in her father's house with a midwife and no one else, and in September she had packed the carpet bag and purchased the train ticket and written her father a letter that said she was going north and would write when she arrived, and that she loved him and was not asking his permission. The wagon driver who took her the last 11 miles from the depot to Copper Falls had said his piece without being invited to. He was a narrow man with a tobacco habit and the particular forthcoming nature of someone who spent most of his days in solitude and had learned to compensate when company arrived. He said the rancher at Copper Falls, a man named Silas Holt, had lost his wife in a stampede accident going on 2 years past. He said Silas Holt ran 300 head of cattle and employed 4 ranch hands and had not hired house help since his wife died, because he could not bring himself to put another woman in that house. He said a woman from the church auxiliary had brought a casserole in December, and Silas had left it on the porch, without opening the door. He said all of this while looking at the baby in Grace's arms with the expression of a man tallying a sum and finding it considerable. He advertised for a housekeeper, Grace said. He did, the driver allowed. Month ago. Ain't had a taker yet. He has one now, Grace said. The driver said nothing more. The road turned north, and the hills on either side went from yellow to gray, and the baby slept against her chest the whole 11 miles, which she accepted as a small mercy offered without explanation, the kind she had learned to receive without questioning. The ranch at Copper Falls was larger than she had expected, and more worn. The main house was a solid 2-story structure that had been built by someone who knew what they were doing and maintained. For some years after, by someone who cared how it looked. The lines were good, and the windows were many, and the covered porch wrapped 2 full sides. But the porch railings needed paint, and 2 of the fence posts along the near pasture leaned at the angles of men who had given up standing straight, and the kitchen garden had gone to dry stalks and seed that no one had pulled at summer's end. It was the look of a place that had stopped believing in itself. She had seen the same look on people. The man who came to the door did not come immediately. She knocked twice and waited, and on the 3rd knock the door opened and Silas Holt stood in it and looked at her the way a man looks at something he was not prepared for. He was tall, dark-haired, going gray at the temples, somewhere in his middle 30s, with the weathered, angular face of a man who worked outdoors in all seasons and did not think much about it. His eyes were the particular gray of winter sky over flat land, not cold exactly, but not warm either. Uninhabited, he looked at her, then at the baby, then at her again with an expression that did not change. "I'm here about the housekeeper position," Grace said. "I see that," he said. "My name is Grace Hadley." She used the name deliberately, not Winslow, not Aldridge. The name she had made from the middle of the ruins, the maiden name she had gone back to, because it was hers, and she was keeping it. "I have experience managing a large household, preserving and cooking, basic nursing, and keeping accounts. The child is 4 months old and sleeps well. He will not be a disturbance to your work." Silas Holt looked at the baby again. The baby, whose name was James, and who had his mother's broad forehead and his father's eyes and neither of their temperaments, was awake now and looking back at Silas Holt with the direct, untroubled attention of an infant who had not yet learned to be cautious. "Wage," she said. "Whatever you were offering in the advertisement." $35 a month, Silas said. "Room and board. I'll take it." He stepped back from the door. She took that as invitation and walked in. The kitchen was a catastrophe delivered in stages. The cook stove had been cleaned recently enough that it was functional, but not recently enough that it was pleasant. And the evidence of 4 ranch hands eating without supervision was distributed across every surface with democratic thoroughness. The flour was kept in a sack on the floor beside the barrel rather than in it, and the flour sack was open, and something with small feet had been through it. The window above the basin was intact, which she noted as a positive. The basin itself smelled like the decision to deal with something tomorrow that had been made approximately 47 times in a row. Silas stood in the kitchen doorway and did not apologize for any of it. "The room is at the top of the stairs," he said. "Left side. There's a crib in there from—" He stopped. "Restarted, there's a crib. It hasn't been used." She understood what that meant without requiring him to finish the sentence. "I'll manage," she said. He nodded. He left. She stood in the kitchen alone for a moment with James on her hip, looking at the extent of what needed doing. Then she found the apron on the hook by the door, tied it on with one hand, settled James into the clean corner of the floor she made by moving a crate, and began. She was still working at 9 o'clock when one of the ranch hands, a young man named Orson, perhaps 19, with a permanent expression of someone surprised to find himself somewhere, came through the back door and stopped short at the sight of the clean stove and the smell of something warm and yeasty rising from the oven. "Ma'am," he said. "There's bread in 20 minutes, Grace said. "Get the others. Supper's on the back of the stove and it's been there since 6, so it's past its best, but it'll do." He went. He came back with 3 others who filed in with the instinctive tidiness of men who had been without a woman in the house long enough to remember their manners. They ate without speaking, which was its own form of praise, not the polite, distracted eating of men working through obligation, but the quiet, concentrated eating of men receiving something they had been doing without. The bread came out, and Orson ate 3 slices and said nothing, which Grace accepted. Silas ate at the far end of the table. He said nothing either, but when he had finished, he sat for a moment longer than the others, and his eyes went once to the baby sleeping in the crate in the corner with a folded kitchen cloth beneath him, and whatever he thought about that he kept entirely to himself. He left a stack of firewood outside her door that night. She found it in the morning and said nothing about it at breakfast. She had been there 12 days when she found the room. It was not locked. It had no lock. Just a door at the end of the upstairs hallway that was kept shut, and she had respected the shut door because she had been a woman in someone else's house long enough to know which doors you did not open. But on the 12th day she was cleaning the hallway, and her cloth caught the latch, and the door swung inward 3 inches. Enough to see. A child's room, small and complete. A painted wooden horse on the floor. A quilt on the narrow bed in blue and yellow squares. A pair of small boots set side by side under the window, as though their owner had only just stepped out of them. She pulled the door closed carefully and went back to her work. That evening, when the hands had gone to the bunkhouse, and the kitchen was clean, and James was asleep upstairs, and the house had gone to the particular quiet it kept after 8 o'clock, she came into the main room to bank the fire, and found Silas sitting at the table with a glass of whiskey he had not drunk, and a piece of paper he was not reading. She moved to the fireplace and did what she had come to do. The boy was 4, Silas said without preamble. "Nathaniel. He was with his mother when the fence gave. I was in the south pasture. He did not look up from the paper. I keep the room the way she left it. I know it isn't sensible." Grace set the poker against the hearth. "It's sensible enough," she said. "People have told me to clear it out. People tell you a great many things, I'd expect," she said. "That doesn't make them right." He was quiet for a moment. He turned the glass once on the table. "You had something taken from you. Before you came here." It was not a question exactly, more of an acknowledgement, the way a man who has known loss identifies it in the posture and the eyes of someone else, without needing the full accounting. "Yes," she said. "The child's father. He decided not to come," she said. The plain language of it, she had found, was easier to carry than any elaboration. "I decided to go." Silas looked at her then directly, for the first time since the day she'd arrived. His face was still the same careful arrangement of almost nothing, but underneath it, somewhere in the gray eyes, there was something she recognized. Not pity. Pity would have been easier to dismiss. Something more like recognition. "I'll finish the banking," he said. "Go up." She went. The thread arrived on the 20th day, dressed in a wool coat and a reasonable expression. His name was Fletcher Marsh, and he had been Declan Aldridge's closest friend since boyhood, which was information Grace had from a letter she had not asked for. It had arrived at the ranch addressed to Miss G. Winslow, which told her immediately that someone in Cheyenne had been looking, and that Declan had helped them find her. The letter was from Declan's family solicitor. It said, in the measured language of a man who had been paid to be precise, that Declan Aldridge had expressed a desire to be present in the life of the child. It said that a woman living in an unmarried capacity in a ranch household with 4 men and no respectable standing presented grounds for a petition of concern to the county court regarding the child's welfare. It said that Declan hoped this could be resolved without the involvement of a judge, and that what he proposed was this: Grace would return to Cheyenne. She would accept an arrangement, quietly, without marriage. The child would carry the Aldridge name, and Declan would provide financially. She would not make further trouble. She read the letter twice, folded it, and put it in her apron pocket. Fletcher Marsh arrived 2 days after the letter, in a hired wagon, with the particular confidence of a man who had been sent to collect something and had not yet considered the possibility of being refused. He came to the kitchen door in the afternoon when the ranch hands were in the south pasture and Silas was at the fence line. He stood on the step and looked at Grace, and then looked at James on her hip, and his expression said everything his words were still organizing to say. "Miss Winslow," he said. "I believe you received, Hadley," Grace said. "My name is Hadley." "Regardless," Marsh said, and the word landed the way it was intended to, as a dismissal of everything she had just said. "The Aldridge family has extended a reasonable offer. One that recognizes your situation and the difficulty of your circumstances, and offers you a way out of," he gestured, briefly, at the kitchen behind her, at the ranch, at her, at all of it. "I have a position here," Grace said. "A fair wage and a roof over my son's head. I'm not in difficulty." "You are living," Marsh said carefully, "without a husband, without a recognizable name, in a working ranch house, with a child no court in Wyoming will look favorably upon your situation in caring for. Should it come to that?" "Should it come to what?" said a voice behind her. She had not heard Silas come in. He was standing at the kitchen doorway with his hat still on and the dust of a day's fence work on his coat, and he was looking at Fletcher Marsh with the gray, uninhabited eyes that Grace had spent 20 days learning to read, and had learned meant, in this particular configuration, that he was paying very close attention. Marsh recalibrated. "I'm here on behalf of the Aldridge family, regarding the—" "I heard the regarding," Silas said. He came into the kitchen and stood beside Grace, not behind her, beside her. Close enough that his arm nearly touched hers, close enough that the message was plain without a word of it needing to be spoken. "I'm Silas Holt. This is my ranch and my household. You'll tell me what business you think you have here," Marsh told him, with less confidence than he had started with. Silas listened without interrupting. When Marsh finished, Silas was quiet for a moment. "The man who was supposed to marry her," Silas said, "didn't show up. Then he waited until she'd left the state and built herself a decent life. And now he wants to threaten her into a backroom arrangement, using her son as the lever. That's the sum of it." Marsh opened his mouth. "You can tell the Aldridge family," Silas said, "that Miss Hadley is employed here and is doing her work well, and has given me no cause for any concern whatsoever regarding her conduct or her care of that child. You can tell them that if they attempt to bring this to a county court, they will find that I have a good deal to say about a man who leaves a woman standing in a church and then pursues her across 2 states when she has the indecency to survive without him." He took the letter from the table where Grace had left it that morning, folded it once, and held it out to Marsh. "Take that back with you." Marsh took it. He left. The kitchen was very quiet. James, on Grace's hip, pulled at the string tie of her apron with the focused dedication of a child who has found something interesting and intends to solve it. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," Silas said. He was looking at the closed kitchen door. "I know it." She looked at him. He looked back. His expression had not changed exactly, but something in it had opened. Not much, just enough. The way a window opens a crack in a room that has been shut too long and lets in air that has no name except necessary. "He'll write to the county court anyway," she said. "Marsh will. Men like that don't leave without doing some damage." "Let him write," Silas said. "I know Judge Carlisle in Bitter Creek. I'll write first." He took his hat off and set it on the table and sat down, which meant he was staying for supper, which he had not done in 22 days without being called down for it. She turned to the stove. The letter Silas wrote to Judge Carlisle was 7 lines long. She did not read it. She had not asked to, but she saw it on the table the morning he rode out to post it. And what she could see of his handwriting was the handwriting of a man who had gone to some effort over 7 lines that might have been written in 3. She did not remark on this. The night vigil came in the 4th week. James had been fussy for 2 days, the hot-faced, inconsolable fussiness of an infant cutting his first tooth, and on a Thursday night he would not be settled. She walked him for 2 hours, the length of the kitchen, the main room, the kitchen again, and at midnight she heard the creak of the stairs and Silas appeared in the kitchen doorway in his work clothes, which meant he had not been to bed yet either. "Give him here," he said. She hesitated, not because she doubted him, because she had not, in 5 months, given James to anyone. She gave him James. Silas took the baby against his shoulder, the way a man takes a baby who has held one before and has not forgotten how, with one large hand flat against the small back, the infant's head tipped to hear the heartbeat. He walked, not the urgent, effortful walking of a man trying to solve a problem, but the slow, deliberate walking of a man who has decided to be present and is prepared to stay present as long as it takes. Grace sat down at the kitchen table, which she had not done in what felt like a very long time, and put her forehead in her hands. James quieted within 15 minutes. She looked up. Silas was standing at the kitchen window with the baby asleep against his chest, looking out at the dark yard, and his expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. Not happy, not sad, something wider than either of those. The expression of a man in the middle of understanding something that is happening to him and choosing not to stop it. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. After a while, she went upstairs to put James in the crib, and Silas followed and stood in the doorway while she laid the baby down, and then she turned around and he was still there, and neither of them moved for a moment. "You said your name is Hadley," he said. "It is," she said. "It doesn't have to stay that way," he said. She looked at him. He was holding the doorframe with one hand, and he was looking back at her with the direct, considered gravity of a man who has decided to say a thing and has made sure he means it before saying it. He was not a man who made speeches. She had established this in 4 weeks. What he had just said was, for him, the full length of what he intended to deliver, and it was waiting on her. "You don't know much about me," she said. "I know enough," he said. "You walked 11 miles at night in the wrong boots because you would not stop. You walked into this kitchen, and you started working before I had finished telling you where anything was. You have a son who looks at the world like it owes him nothing, and he's content about that." He paused, "And you closed that door at the end of the hall very carefully the day you found it open, and you didn't say a word about it to me, and that mattered more than I know how to explain. The door at the end of the hall, the painted horse, the pair of small boots." She understood what he was telling her. Not simply that she was wanted, though he was telling her that too. He was telling her that the way she had handled his grief, the quiet respect she had paid to what he had lost, had reached him in a place he had not expected anything to reach. "My name is Broken," she said. That's what people in Cheyenne said. A broken name. A woman who is neither one thing nor another. "Grace Holt," he said. "That's a name that isn't broken. That's a name I'd be glad to give you, if you'd be glad to take it." He was quiet for a moment. "Your son, too. Both of you. That's enough for me, if it's enough for you." She looked at him for a long time. In the crib behind her, James made the small, wet sound of a baby in deep sleep, the most peaceful sound in the world, she had decided, and the most terrifying, because it meant he was trusting her to hold everything together while he rested. She had been holding everything together alone for 11 months and 14 days. "It's enough," she said. They were married in the Bitter Creek courthouse on a Wednesday in late October, with the ranch hands as witnesses and James asleep in Orson's arms through the entirety of it, which the judge said was the best-behaved infant he had seen at a legal proceeding in 11 years on the bench. Silas put the ring on her finger without ceremony, a plain gold band he had ridden to Bitter Creek to buy 2 weeks before and had not mentioned to anyone. And when she looked up at him afterward, his face was doing the thing she had come to watch for. The thing she had first seen on a night in January when he had stood at a kitchen window with a sleeping baby and understood something that was happening to him. It was not a broad, easy expression. It was the specific look of a man who has been in the dark a long time and is allowing, with caution and with intention, a light in. The Aldridge family did not write to the court. Whether it was Judge Carlisle's response or some other cause, Grace never knew and did not particularly require the answer. What she knew was that in the spring, when the mud came up through the last of the snow, and the kitchen garden came back green in the beds she had dug and planted in March, and James took his first 3 steps across the kitchen floor toward Silas's outstretched hands and crowed with triumph at arriving. In that spring, in that kitchen, she knew that she had not arrived at this life because a man had come to save her. She had arrived at it because she had kept walking down a dark road in the wrong boots and had refused, at every point along the way, to sit down in the cold and wait for someone else to decide what she was worth. Silas had not decided that. She had. He had simply been paying attention. In 1896, 13 years after that Wednesday courthouse, their daughter Hannah rode her first horse across the yard at Copper Falls, and Silas stood on the porch with James, 17 by then, nearly as tall as his stepfather, with his mother's forehead and a calm, unhurried certainty in his face that was entirely his own, and watched her go, and said nothing for a long while. Then he said, "She's got her mother's nerve." James watched his sister circle the paddock without pulling up. "Yes," he said, "she does." Grace Holt had never once in her life apologized for the space she occupied, and the life she had built at Copper Falls occupied considerable space. 2 children, 300 head of cattle, a kitchen garden that was the envy of the county, and a man who had learned, late and carefully, and with the full weight of what it had cost him, that a heart could hold more than one thing without the new thing erasing the old. She had come to Montana with nothing but a baby and a name that the world had tried to break. The name was whole now, and it was hers.